Hi, welcome back to Burning River Bushcraft. Today we're going to be making a board cut slingshot. So making a laminated board cut slingshot is a great way to experiment with a lot of different frames that isn't always possible to do if you're using a natural fork for a base. Now for a core for this, so this is going to be the center part of the slingshot. This is very important. You're not just going to be taking random pine boards out of the lumber yard and making all these cool shapes and designs. They're just not structurally sound enough. So we have to use plywood for this. But here's where it gets tricky. We're not just using any plywood. If you look at some of the serious slingshot guys, there's a lot of channels on YouTube way more into it than I am. And what they use is a product called birch multiplex. I looked all around. Lumber yards in my area have no idea what birch multiplex is. So this is standard 3/4 inch plywood. So this is just the builder's grade. And you see the 5 layers here. This is not what they're talking about. When they're dealing with a multiplex, they have multiple layers. There's 7. It just gets crazy. There's an aeronautical grade plywood. This type of plywood is very hard to find locally for me. A lot of places sell it online. That's probably your best bet. Simple Shot has just pieces of multiplex. With the multiplex, it's much stronger and lets you go to some of the more exotic slingshot designs. Sticking with the basic designs, I found a solution that is available locally that's going to help us out. So what I have been able to find locally is a finished grade plywood. It's available in Lowe's or Home Depot. It is in the specialty boards, and it's not always full sheets. Matter of fact, it's usually 2x2s or whatever, which actually works out perfect for making slingshots. What I've got here, if you see, I've got a whole extra row here. So this is a 7-ply instead of the 5-ply. I have experimented with the 5-ply, but when I start drilling it, it usually just comes apart pretty easy. So this 7-ply actually was part of a shipping crate. So I'm always looking for plywood for some odd reason, and I saw these extra layers here and I got all excited about it. So this is a piece of 3/4 inch plywood that I was able to salvage that was just a shipping crate. So we're going to be using this as our core. So people get these and make some really fancy slingshots. They use exotic hardwood and stuff. That's not really what we're trying to do today. This was free, so I wanted to stay low buck with it. So this is a piece of a pallet right here. So this is hardwood. I don't know what it is. I was going along, a lot of the pallet boards are 3 inches wide. That wasn't going to work for me. I went through a whole bunch of skids till I found a piece that was 6 inches wide. So this is going to be the outside pieces. So we're going to have a plywood sandwich between 2 hardwood boards. So this is rough hewn, just piece of pallet here, and it was cupped slightly. So I took it inside and just used my belt grinder to go ahead and flatten this up. So if you had a planer, if you had whatever, if you're using new materials, not scrounge materials, then you probably wouldn't have to do this step, but this is where I'm at right now. So there's a bunch of different ways to do this. The method I'm going to be using today is using a hole saw to make the radius here. That way it's going to be nice and neat. If you do not have a hole saw, make whatever pattern works for you. So just real roughly here, I'm going to cut this board in half. And I'm going to give myself a center line down the middle. So this is a 16-inch board. I'm going to cut it at 8 inches. 6 inches is plenty for a slingshot. I was going to go 7, but then I'd have an odd amount left over. So I'm just going to cut this thing right in half, and we're going to go ahead and just trace out a rough design for our slingshot. All right, so I've got my 3 pieces cut. They're about 8 inches by about 6 inches. And I'm just going to come in be a 1/4 inch or so. Now these are just going to be rough reference marks. This is going to tell us where we're going to put our pins. In no way is this going to dictate the shape of our slingshot. This is just really a rough measurement right now. So coming up from this bottom mark, I'm going to come up about 4 inches. And then I am going to I'll do a pin at 1.5 inches. And a pin at 1.5 inches both ways. Okay, so just vaguely, this is going to be the handle of our slingshot. This is going to be our center line. I can change this contour, but I don't want my pins to be in a bad place. So we're going to glue these 3 boards together and just put dowels through them to hold it together. And from this point, I'm going to come out here and just basically give myself a wide frame. I want to make sure everything is within the boundaries of my slingshot frame. So if you're going to be using a hole saw like I did, at this point you want to know the radius of that hole saw. It's best just to cut it through a template. If you have a slingshot you like, or you just don't quite have the experience yet, you can get any old board, not necessarily strong enough to make a slingshot with, and just put it in your hand, see how it feels. I mean, we can see this is going to get cut off here eventually. Now, I like to keep everything around 1 inch. I don't like to get real super skinny with anything. So I want to make a mark about 1 inch from where I feel the bottom of my handle is going to be. So with this inch mark from the bottom of my handle, I'm going to use my little pattern here to see what the radius is going to look like. So we now know that this is the inside curve of the frame. So I'm going to go 1/2 inch measured, and I'm going to give myself a pin here and a pin here. So once I established my inside radius that's going to be dictated by my hole saw, I went over 1/2 inch on both sides. I'm going to drill that through for a dowel, and 1/2 inch on the outside is going to be the minimum of my frame. So again, this outside, everything here, I can play with. I can make it bigger, smaller. I can put shelves for my fingers, whatever I want to do. But this is going to be gone. So we don't want to have pins anywhere close to this. I think I'm going to delete this one. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I'm going to have 7 dowels in this. I don't want to have anything too close to the bottom, because then I don't have the option to cut the bottom off if I've got a dowel there. So on the top only, now this is my pallet board, I'm going to go ahead and drill 1/4 inch holes everywhere but the bottom here. So I'm going to go ahead and put my 7 holes in, and then I'll get ready to glue and laminate this.
Insert elevator music. Intermission.
So my laminated board cut slingshot block has had 24 hours to dry. I lost audio in that last section, so hopefully we learned a couple things. Number 1, don't leave the camera out when your daughter's around. Number 2, check your microphone frequently. But anyway, I just glued this, drilled it through, and glued in doweled pins. So I just chopped the pins off real quick when I was checking it out. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to actually cut the hole right now. I'm going to cut the full circumference. It's just going to be a round hole, then I'm going to bob the top off. So I've predetermined the size on my template. If you do not have hole saws, or you're using a different technique, then you would just jigsaw this, or however the heck you're going to cut this radius. So this is like a 2-inch hole saw, just if you're playing along at home and want to try to copy what this is. And I've got about 3 fingers across it, and that's about what my natural fork slingshot came out. Now a lot of guys do this differently. A lot of guys will pre-cut all 3 boards and then try to assemble them together. And you can see how the edges just run wild when it's all wet with glue. This is the best method I have found. It's not perfect. I'm still going to go in there and just touch it up with sandpaper, but I'm not really taking off a ton of meat. And anytime you start to really go at this with a lot of paper, you start to oblong the hole. So whatever. If you don't have access to this, just get yourself a jigsaw and do the best you can. So one of the disadvantages to using a hole saw like I choose to do is obviously once I get to a certain spot, I start to curve in again. I don't want that. So it's just something I'm going to deal with, and I'm going to just pick a spot that I'm going to call the top of my slingshot and cut the entire board off. At that point, I'm either going to sand or jigsaw the holes straight. So I'm going to start by cutting this line here. That's going to be the level top of my slingshot, and I leveled off the first board. So if you wanted to run this through a table saw or something to give yourself, you know, 3 flat sides to work with, knock your socks off, use the equipment you've got. So once I just cut the big edges off, I'm going to do most of this contouring and shaping with the sander. I've got a little more control with it. I think I can make it look a little cooler than I can with just a saw. But you can do amazing things with a jigsaw. You can rasp this. You've got a lot of different options. So you're just basically trying to cut off all the rough work from it. Now, this is unpinned. This is just the laminate. So this is what we're talking about here as far as the core of your slingshot. And this stuff's pretty darn tough. So that tight bond is plenty sufficient for a slingshot. All right, so here's where we're at. I went ahead and used the spindle sander and the belt grinder here to get most of it down. Looking pretty decent, and I haven't even touched the side yet. So you can see how much meat's got to come off of here. Before you get too carried away with it, if you want to make a shelf for your finger, you know, you would draw that out, or make a little platform for your thumb. If you want to make an indentation for your hand, you could take a bow grip and stencil it out on here. Give yourself some kind of lines of reference. But you can see a lot of this is just bulk that's going to have to get removed, specifically off the front. So if you had a table saw or whatever, you know, just go ahead and use what you're comfortable with. I'm going to go ahead and use my grinder, and I'm going to call this the target side of the slingshot. And I'm probably going to, you know, take off about a 1/2 inch or so. All right, so I took about half of that board down pretty quickly, not too bad at all. And that's going to be our look with our pins. They're going to have a little contrast to it. It's kind of cool. Now on the side here, I kind of gave myself a rough contour. So you can see that palm swell starting to take place. Now with the top as thick as it is, I'm kind of losing track of things. So I'm going to go ahead and take the frame, top of the forks down pretty thin. Maybe a 1/4 inch or so. So all this is going to be. So I'm pretty happy with how it turned out here. I significantly took the bulk down, took the palm swell down. It was just too thick a slingshot. I've got nice scallops front and rear, exactly where I need them to be. I'm going to hand sand this now and just knock the edges off, or that belt's just a little rough sometimes. And I think it's going to be ready for some stain. So before I put the stain on it, I'm all done sanding. So I think the pins give it a nice look, nice contrast. You can see the core. So in reality, you know, if you've got a piece of 3/4 inch finished grade plywood, or if you're lucky enough to get the multiplex, this is just a veneer. So I'm really only using maybe a 1/4 inch on the front. The back side's a little bit thicker with that palm swell, but it doesn't have to be there. So you can get creative with it and use whatever you want to. And again, the different types of wood is going to take the stain different. So even if you didn't have decorative wood, you could say you were making 3 of them or 5 of them for kids or grandkids. Each one could have their own designated color. The stain's going to go on there and look a little bit different. You've got different pin options as well. So these are pretty awesome. If you're not quite sure of what to make, there's a ton of different patterns on the internet. And the simplest way to do it is just to print out a pattern, put it on here, and cut it out. I knew that I was going to kind of custom make this thing anyway, and I kind of had an idea in my head, so I didn't even bother. And another great thing about this project is kids don't learn shop in school anymore. So my son's out today. You heard a little noise in the background. He's over making a board bow. So it's good to get kids out and teach them how to use tools that are just common tools for adults. Kids just don't get to do that anymore. So they can make a pretty cool project depending on age. Their dad or grandpa might have to help them out with a little bit, but they're going to learn how to use the tools. They're going to get something out of it, and this is something that they can keep forever. The laminated board cut is not quite dry yet, but I'm impatient. I gave it 3 coats, and you can see I've got a little bit of contour on it. No sun today, so I don't quite have the light that's going to show this thing off. I'll try to get some still photos of this thing and add them into the video. If not, I'll probably have it on Facebook or Instagram, one or the other. So I've got a steel target behind me about 7 yards away. I'll go ahead, we'll shoot this thing and see if we can see where it's going to hit. That was just under it. Frame. So it's definitely a good feeling slingshot in the hand. I like the looks of it. It's got that nice curved, well sanded look. So here's another fun project to do. So you can find this finished grade multiplex board at most of the big box stores. Keep your eyes open for it as scrap like I found this. I was lucky enough to find a pretty large piece, but you want to stay away from just the standard builder's grade 5-ply plywood. You want to go up from there. Other than that, just your imagination is your only guide. All right, till next time, this has been Jamie Boggs from Burning River Bushcraft. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and click like, click subscribe, and ring the bell to be notified of my latest videos. Till next time, see you soon.